Hello and welcome to our conference podcast series, Power of Potential, sharing experiences from Universal Design for Learning journeys. Welcome to Alexis Reid. So Alexis is an educational therapist and a learning consultant in the US. So hi Alexis, thanks for being here today.
Hi, Kirsty. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I'm sat in my office at the University of Worcester on the Severn campus. Can I ask where you are today?
Yeah, I'm here in Boston at my office.
Oh,
Yep.
Brilliant. So how have you ended up involved in this podcast series then, Alexis? If you can tell us how you've ended up talking to me.
Yeah, no, I'm really honored to be speaking with you, and I am excited to be contributing to the conference at the end of the month, the end of June. So I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about, I have a new book that I just published with CAST Publishing, and I'm really excited to be talking about executive functions to dedicated educators and curious souls who are passionate about universal design for learning, as I am.
That's brilliant. That's exciting. There's a new book as well. So we can perhaps get a link to that and perhaps put that in a link to the video for listeners if they're curious and want to find out more.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so as with all podcasts, with all our guests, we have asked for the four same questions, and they've all gone in different directions. And I know that we spoke earlier, and you said you've done some sort of thinking about these, and you've got some notes that you might be reading from. So, my first question then is, in your words, what is universal design for learning? So, how would you define it?
Yeah, it's so funny because I've been teaching on UDL for a little over a decade now, and I still find it difficult to really put together into one very coherent, concise definition. So I did a little thinking in preparation for today, and I'll just share a little bit about what I came up with. So I think that UDL is actually one of the greatest gifts to the field of education. It really takes learners' needs into consideration to establish a framework that allows for educators, or really anyone who uses it, to guide them in how they interact with learners of all age or vocation. So to recognize that learning and development is not a neat, perfectly sequential trajectory. Learning is variable, and UDL provides options for educators and learners alike to pause at the beginning of our design phase to consider really what's possible, what we can establish as more accessible, even before we build out learning opportunities and environments. So when we make these small little tweaks to learning environments and our approach to teaching and learning, I think we can capture the learners who have slipped through the cracks or have just gotten by, or rather than engaging them in a more robust and unique experience and process of learning.
That's really interesting. So that's, that's a really concise definition, and I think it sounds like something that's quite applicable that you can use. And we've heard from lots of other colleagues around, maybe it's an ethos and maybe it's a way of working, but this is very much a framework. And I really like what you said about it's an opportunity to pause. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So in my work in helping people build cognitive skills, especially executive functions, as an educational therapist, my privilege is to be able to work with learners of all ages, to be able to help them just pause and reflect on their situation, right? We, as educators, we get trained to kind of just, pump out and churn through all the content that's needed to get through any given curriculum. But really, how are we doing? How are we relaying that information? How are we helping students and learners alike to investigate and be curious? And oftentimes, as educators, we have a tendency to fall back on the way we've been trained or the way we learn best, instead of really checking ourselves and recognizing that, at the core of UDL, as I said before, I think is this acknowledgement of variability, that not everybody learns in the same way. So maybe we need to make a different entry point or a different tweak to the way we're presenting or allowing learners to explore and show what they know, instead of feeling like we need to do a complete overhaul, which I think is the overwhelming nature of making any educational change.
Absolutely. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. And you talk with such clarity about it. It's wonderful to hear. So I mean, I don't know if you're based in a particular setting, Alexis, but one of the questions is, what does universal design look like in your setting? And it sounds like you have a few hats and perhaps a few different settings that you work in. So I'm not sure how straightforward that question is for you.
It's the hardest one. The individuals I work with often say it's hard for me to define exactly what you are. You do a little bit of everything. So when I teach educators or therapists, parents, caregivers, I even work with business people and learners alike about UDL. I tell them that once you learn about it, there's really no going back, right? Like you can't unknow or unsee accessibility or the potential to better improve upon accessibility. So once you know about UDL, you start to notice more and better ways in which the environment was or was not designed to support variability, in how we navigate our worlds, right? Not just learning environments, and also our work. So I work in a couple different capacities as an educational therapist, as I mentioned, in private practice, seeing individuals, small groups, coaching families to better understand how learners learn. But I also work in consultancy with educational institutions around the world, with organizations and even businesses to support developing executive function and really thinking about the intersection between well-being and learning. And then also I design and implement course material at a university level. So I also am an adjunct professor at Merrimack College here in the US. And I also co-host a podcast myself with my brother, who's a clinical psychologist and a sports psychologist. So we get to like integrate all of our expertise and talk through a UDL lens, because of course he's been infiltrated with all of this language and all of the knowledge that I've accumulated over the years. So UDL just kind of permeates all that I do and think and speak. So anytime I design or plan or interact, I'm always thinking about not only like what feels most comfortable for me to do what I'm doing, but also how are people going to potentially receive this? What might they need to better access the information that I'm about to share, or the work we're going to do together, which is really the goal.
So it sounds like, tell me if I'm wrong, sort of summing up what you said, that the UDL approach could be quite transformative. So once you know it, there's no kind of going back. You can't unbake that cake, so to speak. And that it's really transferable, because you've just mentioned so many different settings. So it's a framework that you can take with you and apply in lots of different areas. Interesting, you talk about applying it with families as well, in family work. So really, really interesting stuff. Okay, so why do you think or feel that universal design for learning is so important?
For so much of what I've said already, but also like when we design for the middle, when we think about that bell curve of learning and learners, we're pretty much intentionally leaving out learners who require additional scaffolding and support at both ends of the learning curve. So we miss 2 or more standard deviations above and below the mean. And we miss so many students who would benefit from and contribute to learning in ways that we might not even know unless we provide them the opportunity for them to be able to engage and do that. So I truly believe that it's more of, if I get up on my soapbox, it's like the greatest human right, is to be able to access education. Because the more we know, the more we explore, the more we can make critical decisions. We can make better decisions for ourselves and for each other. And we can become purposeful, contributing members of society, which I think is the ultimate goal of everything. So, UDL provides opportunity and access. And I think if we could be able to think about things better, especially from an educational perspective and in public educations and institutions, that we create access for people to help this world be a better place, if I would be so bold to say.
I think you should be so bold to say, absolutely. And that's really interesting. Forgive me kind of reflecting on what you're saying, but I guess when you talk about that middle section of learners, I guess I've always thought as UDL as how do we provide access for those that are perhaps below the middle, not above the middle, that bell, and that's something that I'd not considered before. So thank you so much for touching on that, because that's definitely going to be something that I'm going to go away and reflect on and think, oh, not considered that before. It's the benefit of interviewing all these brilliant people on these podcasts, is I'm going away with loads of insights.
Oh, it must be so much fun.
It's lots of fun.
I love it. So yeah, I'm so glad to be a part of it.
So the final question really is, what are your hopes for the future in terms of inclusion of universal design for learning? What are your hopes or aspirations?
Yeah, I think, your previous comment is a really good case in point, because a lot of universal design for learning has been really embraced by the special education communities, those who are providing support for those who absolutely need these scaffolds and supports. But I think we miss a whole range, like I mentioned before, of learners who oftentimes kind of just like sneak under the radar, or maybe they're just compliant enough, or they just do well enough that we miss an opportunity to inspire them. And I work with a lot of young adults too, and adults as well, who kind of go through the monotony of work and life, and they start to realize, like, maybe I could do this differently, or maybe I could do this in a way that feels more inspirational or purposeful or passionate or whatever it might be. And I think if we continue doing what we're doing, we're just kind of shooting through for the middle and working more on goal attainment of just getting through educational levels versus really inspiring deep, curious learning. That's why I love I specialized more on the executive function and social emotional learning side of things, even though I do have a lot of great colleagues who teach me so much about, digital accessibility and ways in which to support learners with more higher support needs. But really, even here in the States, there's a lot of misunderstanding about UDL, unfortunately, which I find fascinating, because I've been working, I started out as an intern at CAST probably 15 years ago at this point, when I was in graduate school. And since then, I've worked in different consultancy roles. And now I'm so grateful to have this book out by CAST Publishing, which I'll talk a lot about in my conference presentation. But really, like, there's not enough information out there about UDL. Even in the States, a lot of educators and educational institutions just don't really understand the dynamics of it. And CAST is actually going on their 40th year anniversary this year, which
40
is
years.
wild. 40 years that UDL has been out and about. And, I said before that once you know about accessibility, you can't unknow it. So, like, if you're walking on the streets and there's a curb cut, right, that's intended for somebody who has a wheelchair to gain access to the public walkways in a safe way. Like, that's accessibility, and that's the foundation for where universal design for learning came from. Where are the curb cuts that we could build in proactively to design for everybody to gain access to learning? But really, these dynamics of the UDL framework is a system to work from. It supports educators, it supports parents, it supports administrators and students alike to better understand what the process of learning is about. And I'm a huge advocate of that. So obviously, as we say in our newly published book, my co-author Lisa, Carey, and I, we hope that educational systems gain a greater understanding of the developing brain and related skills. So we don't just treat behaviors that we see emerging as learners struggle, but we can anticipate and support so that all learners accept and understand their different struggles and challenges to access and learn the skills so that they can more positively engage in learning. And again, I'll talk more about this in my session. And my brother and I talk about this all the time on the podcast, because it's like we all have strengths and challenges and difficulties, and life is difficult. But how do we embrace those struggles? Because I think sometimes they teach us the most about ourselves and about what to do next.
Oh, absolutely, Alexis. Your talk sounds so fascinating, and your book sounds really fascinating. And thinking about your hopes, then, what I gleaned from that was, how do we think about curious learning rather than just kind of getting somebody through to reach a certain goal or attainment? Where are the curb cuts in our learning? That's a lovely phrase. And just generally having more knowledge, everybody, more people being aware of it, so that we can do the best we can. So, thank you so much for sharing your brilliant insights and a bit of a snapshot to our listeners, so they can get a feel for what your talk might be about and where you might be coming from. So I'm going to draw it to a close, just to kind of stay on time. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we finish?
I'm just grateful for the community, right, to be able to come together and to discuss these really big topics that I actually believe have really small little tweaks that can make some really great improvements. So I'm grateful to the community and everybody coming together to share their advocacy, share their work, share their experience so that we could all learn together and continue to be on this mission to help everybody that we work with, which
And
is
what a great
really a
mission
unique
it is.
experience. Oh, it's so inspiring. My work doesn't feel like my work, Kirsty. I don't know how you feel. It feels like just what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity and for meeting you today. Thank you.
Yeah, it's lovely. And are you coming to Worcester in person, Alexis, or are you online?
And sadly, I'm not this year. No, I'm going to be online, but I hope to meet you one day soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much. And I hope that the rest of your day goes well. And I'm sure our UDL paths will cross in the future.
I hope so.